The Valiant was followed into service by the remarkably advanced Avro Vulcan. The designer of the Lancaster, Roy Chadwick, was working on the design of a 100-foot span delta as early as 1947. Inspired by German wartime experiments, he envisaged an aeroplane that would have a sufficiently thick wing to house fuel and engines. A slight bulge in the midsection would accommodate the cockpit and bombs. Its delta wing configuration promised significant advantages. Huge storage capacity in the inboard section of the wing, allowing for powerful engines, and good handling characteristics at both ends of the speed range.
In this tunnel, speeds up to Mach 1.6 can be reached, and Avros are now building a third wind tunnel for research into Mach numbers as high as 3.5.
This was groundbreaking aerodynamics, though, and before the prototype could be designed, a number of experimental 1/3 scale delta-winged aircraft would have to be test-flown.
It was at this stage, early in 1950, that Mr. Rowley Falk joined the company. Mr. Falk probably knows more about delta-wing aircraft than any other pilot. He began development flights at a crucial stage. It was the first time any delta-wing aircraft had flown in Britain, and it aroused great curiosity, which wasn't entirely confined to the aeronautical profession.
The first Vulcan flew from here, piloted by our chief superintendent, he was of test flying, Rowley Falk. He came out of the building here, pointed over to the flight sheds, taxied down the runway, turned it round, did all his checks.
698, takeoff.
698, Woodford Tower, cleared for takeoff.
Okay, by halfway down the runway, he was airborne. He was airborne for 2¼ hours. It stopped the whole of Cheshire, the traffic, everything, ground to a standstill, because he'd never seen anything like this at all. He thought it was on the amount of space. He really was terrific. It was a terrific day in aviation.
The remarkable qualities of this design soon became apparent.
The maneuverability of the airplane was quite remarkable. The great wing area meant that at high altitude, the airplane was still extremely maneuverable. And when set against fighters of the day, such as the Lightning, we could easily outturn the fighters without any trouble at all. He only, of course, has little wings that are highly loaded and is less able to turn in the thin air of more than 40,000 feet. If one compares the maneuverability of the Vulcan with other bombers such as the American ones, perhaps the B-52, there is just no comparison at all. The Vulcan had almost fighter-style performance and turn radius, which was quite sparkling by the standards of the day.
He came over the new assembly, that's the name of our workshops here at Woodford, and he rolled it like a fighter. We couldn't believe it, that such a massive aircraft could be rolled. And he smashed all the glass in the roof of the new assembly, and it was like that for a long time, all taped up, till the roof was redone. I've never forgot that, and even the crowd that was here, and all the workforce thought it was terrific.
Each aircraft is built up from over 100,000 separate parts. Shown here is a universal rib assembly jig. Each rib, exactly made, has its place in the wing assembly jig. In this 5,000-ton rubber press, large parts can be produced in one operation, thereby lowering costs. And so the Vulcan goes into production with special virtues as a bomber.
The first production Mark I's were delivered in July 1956. This was to be the world's first delta-wing jet bomber. New Vulcan recruits were faced with an amazingly futuristic-looking aeroplane, quite unlike any other aircraft type that they would have been used to. With its vast wing area and standing at least 6 feet off the ground, it must have been quite a sight. Moving rearwards from the nose, past the bomb aimer's blister, was the entrance door. Behind that, the stalk of the twin nose-wheel assembly. Travelling further under the 3,550 square foot of wing, the next eye-catcher was the main undercarriage legs, with each having 8 wheels carried on a substantial magnesium alloy casting. The weapons bay between them was 29 feet long, ample for the new atomic weapons. The crew entered the pressure cabin via the underside door. Behind and above this hatch, the 2 navigators and air electronics officer sat side by side in bucket seats facing rearwards, towards their equipment consoles. The 2 pilots climbed another ladder to the flight deck, where they have to squeeze past the central throttle console into their ejection seats. This lack of room may have dated back to early designs that envisaged the need for only 1 pilot. Early tests revealed that the workload would in fact have been too much for 1 man to handle, so a co-pilot seat would have to be accommodated. To help the pilots maneuver into their tight positions, underground train-style handles were fitted. These had the added benefit of discouraging crewmen from grabbing any ejection seat triggers. Once they were seated, the pilots were greeted with a well-laid-out cockpit with dual controls and pistol grip columns that were more normally associated with fighter aircraft. Most new Vulcan pilots' only real criticism of the cockpit was that the canopy was completely opaque, allowing no vision overhead or to the rear. A small circular window on either side of the cockpit blister allowed the pilots to see the wingtips, so long as they leant forward as far as possible. Vulcan crews soon became used to these quirks. One other design fault, though, was more serious. Whilst pilots sat on ejection seats, there was no such provision for the rear crew. In any emergency, they would have to clamber through a hatch in the floor. Few escaped from the accidents during the Vulcan's development.